I don't know what to say, but this is the man, Paul Elias, all-time heaviest BASS stringer of all time. I think 144 pounds.
132.
132 pounds. A bunch of weight. That's 20 fish.
20 fish.
Introduced the technique kneeling and reeling.
Yeah.
One of the godfathers of crankbaits. The Alabama rig, the first man to, I mean, this is like, it goes on and on and on about Paul Elias. I'm so excited to have you here. Man, we do this YouTube deal for the kids that want to know how you got to where you're at. And it always is exciting for me to learn. Like, we all have different stories. I mean, you've got lots of stories here. And this may be like a 2-hour-long deal. We've got lots of questions. But how did you get into bass fishing?
Well, I was, I grew up fishing and hunting just all the time.
From Mississippi?
And, yeah, from Mississippi. And my family was really poor, and I had some friends that were kind of well off, and I'd tag along with them. They always had a boat, and they had a vehicle to go hunting, and I was a tag along guy, but it just seemed like I always caught the biggest fish and the most fish. So when I first heard about race kite and tournaments and all that kind of stuff, I'm doing that. I'm trying it anyway, And so I went to college, graduated from college, and went straight to the offshore rigs and said, I'm staying out here till I'm saving enough to buy a boat.
Really?
So I stayed a month one time, and then I started doing every 2 weeks, and I saved up enough my first boat was $4,700. It was a 15-foot Venture with an 85 Johnson on it. And I was proud of that thing. Well, it was kind of crazy. I bought the boat in the summer of '74, I believe. '74.
I was born that year, Paul.
And I'd only gotten to use the boat just a couple months, and I was still offshore working, and I got a phone call that my uncle's wife had died. My uncle was blind. And my dad called me and said, look, Pete's gonna need some help. So, because, she did everything for him. So I quit my job, and I went up to Michigan. Well, it was like October, so it was fixing to start snowing, so I left the boat in Mississippi. And I went up to Michigan and got with him, and I actually stayed up there 4 years. Started a bass club up there.
You started a bass?
I started a bass club. When I brought my boat back in the spring of the first spring I stayed up there, I got a lot of attention because I was the only bass boat up there. So I got a lot of attention, and all these guys would come up talking to me and checking everything out. And, it was funny because those people would stand on the rocks when the salmon and stuff came in. They'd stand on the rocks and throw out. Well, I'd be sitting out there with my trolling motor in that bass boat, and I'm throwing in toward it, and I'm waxing them, catching everything. And when I'd go to the ramp, I'd have 7 or 8 people come up there. They got to look at the boat and all this stuff, You're from Mississippi? Yep. Ended up meeting 7 or 8 guys, and they wanted to start a bass club. So we started a bass club up there, and I think, from what I understand, it's still going on.
Really? What's the name of it?
It's the Free State Bassmasters.
That's cool.
Yeah, they actually got to be pretty big, but I ended up getting out of it because club stuff was kind
I
of.
never knew you were from Michigan, ever.
I wasn't. I was from Mississippi.
I didn't know you.
I lived up there. I lived up there almost 5 years, and I started BASS. I fished one tournament in '76, and man, driving to those tournaments I was in northern Michigan just before the Upper Peninsula, and it got me. So I heard about, I fished the St. Johns River in 1976, my first BASS tournament, and it was kind of funny. That's when Manuel Spencer was through those little grub minnows, was pitching those little grub minnows or flipping them under hyacinths. Well, I'd gone out the first day, and I drew this guy. His name was Willard Moore, and he had a show. And when I drew him, he said, "Man, I got to take my boat. I got a TV show." And that's one of my, sold me a bill of goods, and I said, all right, well, I'll go with you. He said, you catching anything? I said, I'm catching some fish on Rodman. All right, I am too. We'll just go to Rodman then. He hadn't even been to Rodman. He didn't even know how to go through the lock. So we go up there, and I had a decent day. I can't remember, it was cold front and all kind of crazy stuff, but I caught 10 or 12 pounds, and I was in good shape. Well, Manuel Spencer came in with 30 pounds, and everybody said he was doodling those little pot-bellied minnow things under hyacinths. Well, I just abandoned what I was doing and took my boat and went up in those hyacinths, caught one fish. Willard Moore went out there to my fish and caught like 17 pounds.
Oh no!
So I learned the lesson early. I didn't say you don't chase somebody else's fish.
Yeah,
But
that's a good point.
But that was my first deal, you know. But then I fished a tour after that, American bass fishermen, because it paid more money. They went into competition against Ray Scott, and Ray's, if you made a check, was $500, and if you made a check in American bass fishermen, it was $1,000. So I fished them for 2 years. Did pretty good. Was in the top 10 in their angler of the year both years, but you didn't win nothing, you know. But I started to go to bass in '78, and I decided not to. I stayed one more year, and that's the year they went to Ross Barnett for the Classic. I was like, golly, I can't.
Have you moved back to Mississippi?
Yeah, I moved back to Mississippi. No. I moved back to Mississippi in '79.
Okay.
My dad passed away, and I moved back to take care of my mom. So I went to Corbin, Kentucky for 2 years because I don't know if you remember a guy named Corbin Dyer. Well, he was a professional fisherman to the extent what professional fishing was back then, but he was a salesman, you know, and he was like the president of a boat company that he talked his way into being president of this boat company, and he got me a boat, you know, and furnished me a boat and all that kind of stuff, and he talked me into moving down to Corbin, Kentucky and going in remodeling business with him. And he'd let me out. We'd leave for tournaments and just shut everything down, you know. So I stayed there 2 years, and then I went back to Mississippi.
So, I mean, my brain's going 100 different ways. Like, I think of the Mann's 20 plus. I feel like that was your bait. Am I correct in saying that, or in that whole Mann's crankbait line? Like, that was the first deep diving plug. Is it? Am I right? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they called me and said, we have a crankbait that'll run 20 feet deep. And I was like, Dwayne Vinegar was at Mann's at the time, and I said, Dwayne, 20 feet deep. He said, filmed, on video, divers, 20 feet deep. So I was with Bill Norman at the time, and I said, I gotta see this. Well, they sent me some clear prototypes of it, 2 of them. And I'll never forget it. We went to Chattanooga for the first time, Chickamauga, and Hank Parker had been with Mann's for several years, and he didn't have the prototypes.
And you did?
And I did. And it was so funny because I pulled up on a spot, and well, in practice I had a striper take one away from me, and I didn't know how deep they ran, but they ran deep. I knew that much. Well, I'd pull up on a spot in the tournament, and Hank was fishing this, it was like a roadbed deal. I was just down from him on the roadbed, and I hit bottom in 14, 15 feet of water and catching all these fish, and Hank's like, what the heck is going, what is he throwing? He knew about the 20 plus, but he didn't know they had any prototypes out.
Oh no.
So, I mean, I didn't win the tournament or anything, but I did pretty good with it. And he was so mad at them, man, he called up there raising Cain. But it was a neat deal to have that bait and to.
So when did you start kneeling?
Well, that was 1982 when I won the Classic.
Alabama River?
Alabama River.
I heard that you paid a barge guy $100 to move a barge.
That was at Guntersville.
That was at Guntersville. So
in the Megabucks.
In the Megabucks.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Well, I caught the first day of the tournament. I had a terrible day, and I came in. I said, "Well, I'm just going to go fish close." So I came in there by that old that dog food deal over there, and I started down those rocks. Well, I caught a 4-pounder, And then I went up a little ways and I caught a 2-pounder. And I said, well, heck, I'll just fish here tomorrow. And it's time to go in. Of course, everybody smoked them. And I thought, well, I'll just go start out there. So I started on those rocks and I worked my way around. And I'm working these rocks and I looked at my depth finder and I saw it just kind of jog up to about 10 feet. I was in 14 and it came up to about 10. And I said, dadgum. I trolling motored on away from it and turned around and threw that 20 plus out there and hit that rock pile and caught a 5-pounder. So I caught 25 pounds off that rock pile. And I'm pumped up now, you know, I made a big comeback. I get out there the next day, which was the 3rd day of the tournament. And there's a barge that floated over
A big barge.
a big barge. It was tied up. Well, the wind had blown it out enough to where it was over the rock pile. And I was like, golly, why? I hung around there till almost noon. And they told me a barge was coming to move it. A tugboat was coming. Well, I hung around till noon and the tugboat finally shows up and he starts hooking up to another barge. And I said, man, you're not gonna move that barge? He said, nope. I said, can you just push it back in? He said, I can't touch that barge without orders from the home office.
$100?
I said, man, I'll give you $100 if you'll just push it. I can't touch that barge. I said, God almighty. So he leaves with the other barge. And these 2 dudes come walking down there from the dog food plant and they say, we hear you say you'd pay $100 to get that barge moved. I said, you got it. They went over there and got on either end of that thing and pulled that thing in and tied it off. First cast caught a 5-pounder.
Really?
I trolling motored over there, gave them a $100 bill, caught 25 pounds again.
It was worth it, wasn't
I
it?
caught 25 pounds 3 days in a row. Well, 2 days. I caught, I think I ended up catching like 60 pounds. And I was leading the deal going into the 10 cut, but then I did terrible when we went to the 10 cut.
That's it. I always heard that story. I
Oh,
always wondered
man.
where. I just thought it was on Alabama.
Guido Hibden, his wife was raising Cain, saying that was against the rules. And Dewey came
never
down.
heard nothing bad
Dewey
about it.
came
I just
down.
always thought it was neat.
Dewey came down there all red faced. Paul, you're gonna probably get your catch
I
disqualified.
remember Dewey.
I said, Dewey, what for what? He said, you can't have any help locating bass. I said, Dewey, I caught 25 pounds off of them yesterday. I said, I didn't have no help locating bass. So then they changed the rule. You can't have any assistance in catching bass. So that would have broke a rule.
That was the Paul Elias rule,
Yeah,
huh?
they changed it.
I'll be darned. Okay, another tournament that you absolutely blew socks off of it. Guntersville, the introduction of the Alabama rig. Like, it was like Paul was up here and second place was right here. And it probably wouldn't have been, I think they even got an Alabama rig during the tournament.
Well, no, the second place guy was throwing it the whole time.
Okay.
He caught 80 pounds. I caught 103 something, I think. But that was the deal. Like, you know, God kind of sends you stuff. And I'd had a terrible year, 2011, and I'd sold my boat, and I had booked they asked me to do a cancer benefit, MC a cancer benefit tournament at Pickwick in September. So I went and MC'd that tournament, and the guy that made the Alabama rig, Andy Potts, came through the weigh-in line, and he said he didn't have much. He had like 10 pounds, and he said, when weigh-in's over, come over to my boat. I want to show you something. You know how people always want to show you baits, and so I said okay. So we got done. I went over to his boat. Well, he holds up this
Chandelier.
No, it didn't have no blades. You know, it was like he holds it up and it's 5 grubs on these big wires and this big old head. You know, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool, man. He says, we rig them with swim baits too. Really, swim baits? And I'm talking to him. He says, you remember that tournament you were fishing up at the dam? Davey Hite won it and you did pretty good in it. And I said, yeah. He said, y'all were all lined up there? I said, yeah. He said, well, if you remember, there was a big local tournament the weekend y'all got there to start practice. Took 52 days, 56 pounds to win. He said, I won it. He said, I fished 19 tournaments this year and I've won 18 of them He said,
That got your attention in a hurry, didn't it?
I said, every one of them on that? He said, every one of them. Well, he gave me 2, not rigged up or nothing, just gave me 2 of them. I got home, I had all my stuff I took out of my boat in containers, and I just threw them in a container. Didn't think anything about it. A buddy of mine that I sold my 2009 boat to calls me and he says, man, they fixing to send me way off on a pipeline deal. I'm gonna be gone 6 months. He said, I ain't hardly used this boat. You think you can sell it for me? I said, yeah, I probably can. He said, you mind if I bring it over and leave it at your house? I said, all right. So I sold my boat. You care if I use it till I get it sold? He said, no, man, use it. So he brings the boat, and I'm sitting there one night, and I'm going through stuff looking, and I saw where they got a FLW tournament on Guntersville and open. And I thought, I think I'll fish that thing. So I called Bill Taylor, can I get in the tournament? Yeah, we got open. That's all right. So I'm out there rigging, putting my stuff in his boat. And I come across those Alabama rigs, and I sat there and I opened that thing up, and I rigged one up with swim baits. I got a little pond behind my house, and I walked back there and I just kind of flipped it out there and reeled it. And I said, God, man, that thing looks good. Well, a little old bass ran up there and slapped it, and I thought, dadgum. Well, I put it in the rod locker, I got to Guntersville and I'm thinking frog and flipping and buzz baiting. So from 6 o'clock in the morning till noon, I threw a frog and I flipped and I buzz baited and I didn't get a bite. And I said, dadgum, I'm gonna go north. I was up there around the power lines, just north of North Saudi, and I said, I'm gonna go to Mud Creek or something, narrow down the water and figure something out. Well, I idled out into the river and I got a phone call, and I'm idling down the river talking on the phone, and I got off the phone. I was at the Comer Bridge, and I looked at the current going by the pilings, and I remembered that Alabama rig, and I said, he said it was good in current. So I pulled it out of there, fired at a piling, 3-pounder. I said, dadgum, threw back in there again, 3-pounder. Go to the next piling, 4-pounder, and there's like 5 fighting to get the darn thing. I said, holy smokes.
First day of practice.
Yes, and I went, that little cut through right there at the Comer Bridge.
Yeah.
I went through that little cut through. I didn't fish the other pilings. I went through the cut through, and that old burned out bridge, I threw up there by them, caught like a 3-pounder. And I said, good Lord. I just started down the grass line like I'd been fishing all morning. Just caught 15 or 20. But everything in the grass was 3 pounds. 2 pounds, 3 pounds. So the next day I ran bridges. Every bridge I could run on Guntersville. And it was stupid. I came in and I called Andy and I said, Andy, are you sure this thing's legal? He said, man, they just won the regional down on Wheeler with it. That's FLW. He said, it's legal, I promise you. And he said, I'm gonna tell you, some of them boys are gonna be throwing it. He said, I peddled them down here in June when they were at the boat ramps. He said, they got them. There was 5 guys, Porosnik, Dudley, several of them were throwing it, but they were throwing it in the grass. And they were catching 15 to 17 pounds. But the second day of practice, when I went into, South Saudi was loaded. It was loaded. North Saudi wasn't that good, but South Saudi was loaded. I'm rooming with Russ Lane. Well, he asked me, man, you doing any good cranking? And he was talking about, you doing any good out, but I couldn't say anything. So I was like, man, I ain't done any good cranking. So that was the second day of practice. So I come in the third day and he said, man, I can't catch anything out. I said, man, I've caught some, a few, but I said, I hadn't done any good cranking. So I just left it at that. First morning of the tournament, I put my boat in at Seabow to run across the state park. Started up, this guy's boat. Started up, put it, tied up to the dock, parked, came back, motor wouldn't start. I said, what the heck? Motor wouldn't start. So I tried everything, I couldn't get it started. So I got them guys let me break in line. I get the boat loaded and start heading around to drive to the park. When I get there, they're letting boats go. And I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. I cannot believe this is happening. Then I get there and Jay is not there. And I'm like, I call him, calling, he won't answer his phone. So I finally got the motel desk person to go beat on his door. It woke him up. And he gets me fixed at 9 o'clock. And I'm like ready to puke. But I go pulling up to the Guntersville Bridge, and the guy that's fishing with me is like, he'd been asking me the whole time, what are we gonna do? And he was nervous because he was trying to make the championship or something. And I said, man, everything's gonna be fine. Don't worry about it. We got out there and I dug that Alabama rig out there. He said, you throwing that darn thing? I got up there to that point and the wind was blowing like 20, 25. I could nose my boat out around that rock point and waves would come over the front. And I'd fire that thing out there and catch a 5-pounder and duck back in, you know, and then I'd ease out there and catch a 5-pounder. And it was crazy. And I told him, I said, when I get 20 pounds, I'll give you one. But I don't have the heads and I don't have the swim baits. I told him, I said, when I drew him, I said, bring some swim baits and bring some swim bait heads. Well, he brought little 1/8 ounce heads and little swim baits, and I was throwing
big stuff.
Yeah, big stuff, 3/8 ounce heads and big, and I mean, I just smoked them. I caught them at will. But the motor still wasn't fixed. So I was scared to go anywhere. So all I did was go to Spring Creek, fish the Spring Creek Bridge, run back to the Guntersville Bridge and run to Browns Creek. Wow. And just killed them. And I come in, I said, Jay, it's not fixed. The motor's not, he checked it out. Man, it's fine. I left after I won the tournament. I came to Grand Lake for the poker tournament deal. I got 100 yards from the ramp and the lower unit went out.
Oh, no.
So if I'd run anywhere, I'd have broke down.
Huh.
It was crazy. I was just, God.
I mean, I remember that tournament because what was so special about it was like 100 pounds in the fall was like just.
Oh, it unlocked.
Never heard of.
It unlocked the suspended deal. I fished for those kind of fish my whole career and could not catch them.
Right.
I mean, I died on them trying to catch them. Yeah. You know, you'd get one to bite every now and then. It'd be a big one, and you'd think, I'm gonna figure them out. It unlocked the whole deal.
I remember the first time I saw one, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. You know, here we are thinking that you have to have little bitty fishing line and fluorocarbon, and here's Paul's winds with this wire that's this big around.
Oh, it was crazy, man. It was, and that, you know, and what it did for the fishing industry, it was a shot in the arm that it really needed.
Big time.
And when they started talking about getting rid of that thing, I thought, man, y'all were so crazy.
It was like, it was crazy because fish would eat that like.
Yeah, they still do.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I fished that Toyota thing on Rayburn, and I didn't do any good the first day, and I said, heck, I'm just going to throw Alabama rig tomorrow all day long. 20 pounds, you know, just threw it.
That's awesome. Not often you get to sit next to a Bassmaster Classic champ, somebody like you and all the stuff you've done, man. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time just to answer a few questions and tell us more about yourself. I learned a lot about you.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, Edwin. I appreciate it.
Say thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it. And appreciate you guys following along, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a bunch.